The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. We all rise for the Honorable Judge Schlender. Judge Schlender, ahem.
Is he lost?
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today
That's not what he sounds like.
Wow, that's really what you think I sound like, huh?
Here's how it goes. I like to defend things.
Too intelligent sounding.
Okay, I'm gonna split the difference here with this impression. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of the people versus the Many Saints of Newark, a prequel to the HBO series The Sopranos. This 2021 crime drama follows mobster Dickie Moltisanti. Oh boy,
Moltisanti.
Yeah. All right.
Moltisanti.
Okay.
It means many saints.
Dickie Moltisanti, as he navigates gang rivalries and internal family strife in Newark, New Jersey in the 1960s and 70s. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Andre Shane, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you. Honorable members of the jury, as the old saying goes, "Che cosa hai fatto, idiota?" You can't go home again is what that means, roughly translated into English. David Chase's Sopranos was, for many people, a sort of a second home, a television series that put us into the home and indeed the head of Anthony Soprano, played by the late, great James Gandolfini, a Jersey mob boss whose struggles proved increasingly relevant in the turn-of-the-century America. Sopranos, of course, was the show that many people credit as the beginning of the new golden age of television, a show that transcended genre constraints and masterfully blended mob drama and family drama and sharp satire about the paradox that is the American dream. There are many reasons why The Sopranos should not have worked as a series, and the fact that it did work so brilliantly for 6 seasons between 99 and 07 on HBO is in itself a miracle and a testament to the talent of its creator and its directors and its cast. It was indeed lightning in a bottle, and unfortunately, we're not here to discuss The Sopranos. We're here to discuss 2021's The Many Saints of Newark, the very awkwardly titled and generally uninspired attempt by David Chase to recapture the old magic. An attempt to nobody except maybe an HBO executive or 10 actually asked for, because most Sopranos fans know that the lightning could never be recaptured, especially after James Gandolfini died in 2013. The game at that point was over. But cut forward 13 years, and we're given a clear reason why creators should never return to their masterpieces. Saints, and I don't have the strength to call it by its full name, so I'll call it Saints. Saints is a limp, disjointed, and unsatisfying attempt to stuff the lightning back into its receptacle, and sadly, it doesn't work. A prequel set in the late 60s and early 70s, Saints claims to give us the making of Tony Soprano, an origin story of sorts for Tony. And this idea itself is so antithetical to the slow process of discovery that made the original show so compelling. It's just one of the many things that turned me off about this film. The result, we get 2 hours of irredeemable sociopaths, over-the-top Italian stereotypes, and awkward attempts at recasting familiar characters with younger actors, all the while attempting to shoehorn social justice themes that feel about as organic to the Soprano-verse as chop suey to a pizza joint. It saddens me to say, but The Many Saints of Newark is a turkey that will satisfy neither the fans of The Sopranos nor viewers who've never seen a single episode, to whom this film will surely seem like a low-rent Goodfellas knockoff that it is. This is a fundamental misstep that may actually lessen the legacy of one of the greatest TV shows of all time. And that, my dear paisanos, is a real crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shane. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Ryan. Oh, forget about it! Luis Rodriguez. Please present your opening statement.
Well, I can't possibly live up to that nickname, but I'll try anyway.
Oh!
The main question that deserves to be raised today is simple. Do we really need a prequel to anything? The answer is probably no, so when a prequel actually succeeds, it deserves to be commended. The Many Saints of Newark has its work cut out for it to begin with. Following up what is easily the most acclaimed series of the 21st century is a daunting challenge, but I believe creator David Chase and director Alan Taylor were more than up to said challenge. The film manages to tell a story that sets up an entire universe without falling prey to the typical sins of unnecessary prequels, namely front-loading continuity and explaining everything in one long go. It leaves room for interpretation and history unseen, but not in a shameless franchise mentality way, more in line with the ambiguity of the original series. The Many Saints of Newark, or Saints as we're now calling it, reveals that before the events of The Sopranos, there are interesting avenues to explore, circumventing the postmodern gangster vibe by instead focusing on a turbulent moment in American history as seen through the eyes of the series' familial antecedents. Over the course of 3 succinct arguments, I aim to prove that the film stands completely on its own, while providing enough to recommend as a vital chapter in a brilliant saga. Thank you. Case dismissed.
No, order in the court. We are not dismissing the case. Thank you all the same, though, Ryan. Mr. Shane, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Thank you. Gentlemen of the jury, there are 2 things that I promise you at the outset of my case. First, I will do my darndest to prove that The Many Saints of Newark is a substandard, made-for-TV movie that does not deserve to be associated with the genius that is The Sopranos. And second, I pledge never to use stereotypical Goomba slang such as, but not limited to, bada boom, bada bing, forget about it, maron, or any mention of gabagool.
No! Order in the court, please. Please, order in the court. My goodness.
Unless it's absolutely necessary, gentlemen. Unless it's absolutely necessary.
It is necessary.
You do not have
unless
to,
it's necessary.
You do not need to abide by my pledge, but I will attempt to.
We won't.
For Exhibit 1, gentlemen, The Many Saints of Newark is not so much as a story of the young Tony Soprano as falsely advertised by HBO, but a story revolving around one Dickie Moltisanti, the rarely mentioned father of Christopher on the TV show. Played by Alessandro Nivola, Dickie is the central figure of Saints and a character towards whom we are meant to feel some degree of empathy and identification. Like Tony on the TV series, Dickie is smarter than most of the characters around him and is conflicted about his lifestyle, somewhat conflicted. He too has a rich fantasy life where he imagines coaching a blind kids softball team. That's right. That's what he imagines. And unlike Tony, Dickie is an out-of-control psychopath who murders half the people he loves. His actions are so repugnant and his motivation so contrived, Dickie makes for a nasty and barely engaging protagonist. He's not very identifiable, and he's very thinly written, to be honest with you, and more about the writing later. Nivola, as an actor, should have been able to elevate this material at least a little, but sadly he doesn't. His performance is detached and uninteresting, to me at least. I've seen this actor do better work, but he just doesn't work as this character for me. In the second half of the film, the young Tony, played by Michael Gandolfini, takes a more central role in the narrative, and I definitely wanted to spend more time with that character. Instead, I got more Dickie with his terrible hand gestures, 2 highly unconvincing murder scenes, and several psychiatry sessions with his uncle in prison, played by the great Ray Liotta, who's twins in this movie, and he's pretty good. But the rest of the cast is comprised of also good actors playing younger versions of the characters from the show to varying degrees of success. Like Corey Stoll and Vera Farmiga are pretty good. The crew, however, is a cartoonish mess who feel like they're acting in some other film altogether. Leslie Odom Jr. plays Harold, the black up-and-comer in the numbers running game, and he eventually comes into direct conflict with Dickie, a situation that unfortunately amounts to very little narratively speaking. Odom is a good actor, but his character is underwritten, and every time the movie cuts to his side of the story, the narrative comes to a screeching halt. Overall, the story arc around the Jersey riots played poorly and felt grafted on. And don't even get me started on the poetry, which brings me to Exhibit 2.
Well, I'll
Narrative-
pause you right there, Mr. Shane, if I could. I would like to
Sure.
give the defense a chance to respond, especially about the centralness of Dickie Moltisanti.
Well, I think that the movie perhaps works because of the fact that it doesn't necessarily focus on Tony Soprano. And if you're not going to do that, you have to have somebody to anchor it. And I think that by choosing a character that was not ever actually seen on the series is possibly the smartest decision that they made. And I think that the character more than lives up to what he's supposed to. And I think that Alessandro Nivola is a compelling lead and manages to create a character that kind of stands apart from the continuity that we've been previously exposed to. And he does this without sticking out like a sore thumb. Whenever he leads scenes, he's charismatic and dynamic, but he never overshadows the fact that this is an ensemble. And that's what we should be focusing on. That this isn't one person's story. This is the story of a family.
All right, and just a question for the bench, open question to either of you. Does Dickie Moltisanti play any kind of role in the show? Obviously, he's not alive for it, but like, does he get
No.
brought up or anything?
Christopher clearly has some issues with the fact that his father was not alive to see him grow up, but that was not really a character that got a lot of exposure on the series itself.
That's correct. Unlike other characters like Tony's father, for example, who is played by another actor in a couple of flashbacks of the original show.
Correct.
Dickie is just mentioned, and in one scene particularly, Tony mentions him as a sort of like a mentor to him. I think he even says that specifically, but that
Which he follows through with in the film.
Yeah, that absolutely. I mean, definitely Dickie is set up as a mentor to Tony. My issues with Dickie, however, have to do with more with the writing of the character and the performance of the character, where I felt really that on the one hand, the character was just repulsive based on his actions. And on the other hand, I felt that Nivola's acting of the character was underwhelming.
All right, fair enough. We can move on from Dickie. I just thought it would be useful for the jury and everyone at home to get an idea of where Dickie fits into the canon here. So you can proceed with your next point, Mr. Shane.
Thank you. Well, my next exhibit is the narrative rhythm and the bizarre choices the film makes. The Many Saints of Newark begins in a cemetery with Christopher Moltisanti narrates this prequel from the grave. To me, it's an old and tired story device, and I feel it's awkward in this as well. Plus, the expositional narration is poorly written. Once again, we come to the script that amazingly was written by a great writer like David Chase, who seems to be slipping here, and it shows in virtually every scene. Directed by Alan Taylor, who is, of course, a veteran of many episodes of The Sopranos, Saints kind of lurches from one scene to the next without much drive. The film has a terrible rhythm, editorially speaking, especially in the first half. And in the second half, the story suffers from being both predictable and unsatisfying at the same time. I felt that, once again, I wanted to spend more time with the young Tony Soprano, but the movie insisted that it wasn't any kind of coming-of-age movie, bringing me back again to Dickie, who is a lot less fun to hang out with.
Putting it lightly.
Hey, he's a real jerk.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to get close to this guy. It's crazy. And there's also a general lack of nuance in the narrative of the film. Like the film continually chooses to make explicit what should have been more implied, showing instead of suggesting. It's kind of heavy-handed, it's obvious, and it's ultimately not very impactful. And while I concede a few good individual scenes, such as anything with Ray Liotta or some scenes between Tony and Livia, his mom, none of it really builds to a greater whole. So The overall tone of the film is uneven, and it just kind of limps along with persistent and fairly boring detours into just basically what is shameless fan service every time the gang appears, the hairpiece, all this kind of stuff. We've seen it before, and it just feels forced. And then the film ends on a fairly hokey note, I thought, not particularly leaving me wanting more, leaving me wanting less. If we are to judge films on the quality of the overall construct, their architecture, as it were, I think The Many Saints of Newark is a complete failure. It just strikes me as a movie that's bad, but worse yet, it's a movie that has an overall air of mediocrity to it, in spite of the fact that there's some good talent behind it. It's just a failure, and a failure in this case is pretty jarring, because once again, the film exists. It's like reason for existing is a show that it will invariably get compared to. And as my respectable opposition said a few minutes ago, it's difficult to make a film that you have to compare to a work of art like The Sopranos. It's hard to win, but The Many Saints of Newark loses it pretty spectacularly.
Yeah.
All right. So let me kick that over to you, Mr. Rodriguez. Is this movie built on timpano or is it built on braciole?
I have no idea what the fuck that means, but I guess I'll try to answer the question. As I mentioned in my opening arguments, prequels tend to be pretty useless, but I think this movie kind of deepens and enriches the larger Sopranoverse, and it proves that it's kind of a big sandbox with ample room to play in. And you wouldn't think that like a series that ended with perhaps the most ambiguous final shot in TV history could benefit from further exploration, but I think that's what we have here. The series was all about the push and pull between the family and the family, but playing with themes of like loyalty and morality and toxic masculinity and how all three kind of intersect. And I think the film plays on those themes very well. I think the architecture is very strong, and I think the domestic stuff is easily as compelling as the business stuff. And I genuinely want to see the birth of the monster that is Tony Soprano, but I also love that nothing in the film suggests that his origin is the end-all be-all. It's just a chapter. Like the final shot suggests that his destiny is merely beginning, and there's a lot of texture left to explore. Perfect example is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade does this poorly, whereas I think this movie does this well, where every single one of Indiana Jones's personality and idiosyncrasies are born in the space of a single 10-minute sequence. We don't have that here. The difference is born part in due to the fact that Tony is not the protagonist of the film, which I think is one of the great successes of it, but he's just the most recognizable member of the ensemble. So it's like a chapter of a larger novel that has much more to unfold over time.
All right. We'll definitely have to let the jury decide whether it's discombobulated like Mr. Shane was saying, or if it actually is a little bigger and deeper like Mr. Rodriguez is saying. Mr. Shane, you can bring up your next point.
Well, if I may respond to this point.
You can't, actually.
Yes, you can.
No, of course you can't. Order in the court. Don't listen to the judge. You go right ahead.
But
well, the question of deepening what we knew of the world as a Soprano is a very compelling one, of course. And ideally, if you're going to make a project like this and you're going to make a prequel to something as beloved and something as very intentionally ambiguous as The Sopranos on many level, I think it would be very helpful to do it in a kind of a longer term format. And I think we've all heard rumors, or some of us may have heard rumors, that there was some thought of making The Many Saints of Newark into a series or a limited series of some
which they're working on now.
Apparently that in itself doesn't bother me. I would not mind having a series set in this world. I would not mind having a series set with these characters, because a series is what's most effective about flushing out some of this thing. My problem with The Many Saints of Newark is that while the movie tried to provide kind of a subtext to the world of The Sopranos, I just think it failed at it miserably. I think it was uninteresting. I think it was dull. And I think ultimately it didn't have anything new to say to add to what Sopranos had said over its series run. And the overall tone and structure of the film felt extremely rushed because, again, it felt to me like a bunch of TV writers who are used to write 15 hours of scripts a season now all of a sudden had to compact everything into a 2-hour runtime. So all of it seemed unsatisfying and all of it seemed rushed. And very little of it drew complete or even incomplete portraits of anybody. Everybody just came off a little bit caricaturish. And that was a big problem for me with this film.
Do you have a response to that, Mr. Rodriguez? Do you think there is something in this, watching this, that you can then go back to The Sopranos and get more out of The Sopranos, having seen this movie?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that that's a fair assessment. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that David Chase is not a screenwriter. He's a writer of teleplays and a fairly prolific writer in television. And they're two very different mediums. And I think that the way that the Many Saints of Newark kind of plays out, it does kind of play like a pilot for a television series as opposed to maybe a standalone film. And I think that that actually works in its favor. I think that by leaving the audience wanting more by the end of the film, some might see that as a weakness perhaps or a deficiency of the writing. But I think that that is entirely what the whole purpose of the enterprise was dedicated towards. I think it's suggesting that there's so much more to do here.
So that was a choice, not a failing or a bumbling.
I believe it was a choice. I believe that you could easily look at it either way, but I choose to look at it as a choice.
I think once we see what the series, the eventual Many Saints of Newark, turns into and what it develops into, then we could sort of start looking at the film Many Saints of Newark as a pilot. At this point, all I know is that it exists as a standalone film and was marketed as a standalone film. And David Chase ad nauseum talked about how it's a standalone film, and he always wanted to make a standalone film set in this time period, and blah 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 blah. It's to me a standalone film, and therefore I have to judge it as a standalone film. Once again, I can absolutely admit that it would be interesting to see some of these characters in a longer series, or even Dickie, who as you guys can probably tell, I severely dislike as a character and as a performance. But even he would play much better in a longer format. And certainly David Chase is a television writer, and certainly that's his strength. But what we had here was a bunch of disjointed television episodic moments in this tapestry that was kind of jammed into 2-hour package, making it extremely unsatisfying and really not amounting to very much at all. I mean, I don't feel like I'm enlightened to any of the characters' backgrounds at this point.
All right, that's a lot for the jury to think about. If there's another direction you'd like to move in, Mr. Shane?
There is not. I feel
okay.
I tell you, it was challenging for me to get through this movie twice. I found it so extremely dull that just rewatching it and taking notes on it kind of just awoken my feelings of like being let down. And I think that's what it is. I feel jilted, kind of like Uncle Junior at the end of the film, when he fell on the ice and broke his coccyx and Dickie was laughing at him. I felt like the whole film was laughing at my broken coccyx.
Well, then you should have done what I did and only watched it once.
Okay, so Mr. Shane, you are not allowed to order a hit on Ryan until the trial's over.
No problem.
And so, Mr. Rodriguez, you may present your case.
Sure. Part of the success of the film, I think, is its setting. By beginning in the late 1960s and tracking through the early 1970s, David Chase gets to explore a fascinating, tumultuous chapter in American history, including the burgeoning civil rights era. Now, I don't think that Chase could have predicted George Floyd, but this taps into that outrage, depicting people who are being failed and subjugated by society, fighting back against the system. By centralizing the conflict between Italian-American and African-American gangsters, it makes the morality of the situation all the more murky, by featuring criminals on both sides of the racial spectrum. It's the kind of push and pull that Chase excelled at during the run of the original series, while also adding a level of complexity that the series never truly explored. Even though 9/11 happened around the third season of the series, it remained largely a footnote in the narrative, but Saints, as we're now calling it, leans into the societal implications of the time and milks it for all the tension that it's worth. Another important point, the series was a postmodern gangster saga, and this takes place in the era of Goodfellas, as well as just before The Godfather was in theaters, which eventually reshaped the public perception of organized crime. Everything on the series was a reaction to the effect of The Godfather, but this is the precedent.
All right.
If I may respond,
yes,
Your Honor?
please go right ahead.
I think I completely appreciate what Mr. Rodriguez was just saying concerning the intention of the writers and the producers behind the film. I think the problem comes with the execution of the said intention. I think for me, particularly the social justice aspects, the riots, even though they were actual historical events from the period that we could all read about, and stunningly similar to the events that we see happening almost every year now. But the execution and the coverage and the way these events were explored in the Many Saints of Newark just left so much to be desired. Everything felt episodic. Everything felt jarring and just kind of jumped around from one part of another to another, without really creating a lot of identification with any of the characters. I dare anybody to say, outside of Tony, because he's a pre-existing character, who did we identify with in this film in any way, shape, or form? Was it Harold? I don't think so. Was it Dickie? God, no. Was it Dickie's mother-in-law? A little bit, but my God, was she
maybe one of the Ray Liotas.
Exactly. Ray Liotta, the prison Ray Liotta, was the loveliest character.
Prison Ray Liotta.
Prison Ray Liotta
New
was
band name, I call it.
Prison Ray Liotta was literally the loveliest character in the whole film, and he himself has said, "Hey, what do I know? I'm a murderer." And the guy was a murderer for his life, and he still came off somehow better than every other character in the film. Now, that could work absolutely fine in another film, but here everything seemed like just a mishmash of unexplored concepts on top of one another. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rodriguez, your next point, or if you'd like to respond to anything Mr. Schlender said?
No. I think that's
Okay.
Fair assessments. For my final exhibit, I want to focus on the strongest aspect of the film, one that the prosecution brought up briefly, and that is the casting. Following up The Sopranos is no easy task, as I mentioned in my opening arguments, especially when the cast is concerned. It's possibly the greatest cast that's ever been on television. And here you have Livia Soprano, Tony's mother, is one of the greatest, most contemptible characters in television history, and Vera Farmiga does right by the late Nancy Marchand. Livia's unfailing ability to be the nagging devil of insecurity on Tony's shoulder is alive and well, and Farmiga is so good that even though she's hiding behind a distractingly fake nose, the viewers can look right past it. She is so goddamn good. Oh, so good. Ray Liotta has arguably the hardest job of the ensemble by playing identical twins that couldn't be more different in terms of motivation and disposition, which is a familiar trope from lesser television series and films that is handled surprisingly well. One is bombastic and abrasive, the other withdrawn and measured. We also have John Bernthal, the Punisher himself, and Corey Stoll as Uncle Junior, both of whom acquit themselves nicely. Movies like these could easily be Easter egg hunts, little audience pandering moments in search of a larger narrative, but I don't get that impression here.
Can I ask a question? Would you have preferred to see John Bernthal playing Dickie Montesanti as opposed to...
yes, 100%.
That's a fair question. Actually, I would like to see John Bernthal play basically any character, so yeah, I think I would, actually.
Including Livia, the mom.
Yeah, exactly. Put a fake nose on him. He's already got a weird nose already.
His nose is pretty big. His nose is naturally big. I think it'd be perfect. But no, I kept thinking that throughout the film. I mean, John Bernthal's role was such a nothing in this film. And I kept thinking, like, boy, why isn't he playing Dickie? Like, I don't understand. You could easily play Dickie, right? He would be far more interesting as Dickie. And this is sort of goes to my previous point that Nivola just doesn't rise to the occasion. Like you can sort of think of like imagine what Al Pacino had to deal with when he got The Godfather. Nobody wanted him in the role, and he had to rise to the occasion. And boy, did he. Well, with me, Nivola, that's the exact opposite. And I am absolutely on board as far as some of the other performances that Mr. Rodriguez mentioned, particularly my Ukrainian sister, Vera Farmiga, who's fantastic. And she's fantastic in virtually everything she does, by the way. So she's an extremely consistent actor. Obviously, I pointed out Ray Liotta. I can't love that man more if he was sitting right here on the bed next to me. But
challenge accepted.
Well, I hate to shock you, but he's right here in the bed next to me.
Okay.
And he heard what you said. He heard the terrible thing.
Okay. Order in my court. I won't have this turn into some kind of Shantix commercial. All right. So, Mr. Rodriguez, was that your final point?
That is my final point. I'd like to rest.
You would like to rest? We would all like some rest. Okay. Now, I actually have the format open so I can read my lines properly. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Shane, you may begin.
Thank you. My dear friends, as you probably can tell by now, I'm a big Sopranos fan. I'm not a fanatic, but I am a fan. And as a fan, I wanted to love the Many Saints of Newark, which is why it feels so let down to me. This awkward mess of a film that both failed as a self-contained movie and as a prequel to a great TV series. I read some talk that this is now becoming a mini series, and perhaps given a long time to develop these characters in the series, Chase and Company could actually create something worth watching. As it is, they ended up with a very, very sketchy and unsatisfying concoction, and most viewers will find this very easy to just forget about it.
He did it!
He did it!
He did it in his closing, so unfortunately there's no possible way to object. Thank you, Mr. Shane. Mr. Rodriguez, you may present your closing argument.
Thank you. I'd like to present a brief selection of poetry, if I may.
Oh, no, I did this once. It doesn't work well.
No. Over a montage of a city burning.
Woke up this morning, all that love had gone. Your papa never told you about right and wrong. But hey, you're looking good, baby. I believe you're a feeling fine. Shame about it. Born under a bad sign with a blue moon in your eyes. With those iconic words, Tony Soprano once drove from New York to his home in suburban New Jersey to break bread with his family and his family. The Many Saints of Newark, or Saints, does right by these words and the images that went along with them. David Chase took on the daunting task of revisiting his most noteworthy characters more than a decade after they left airwaves with an ambiguous 30-second black screen, without sullying the legacy he and his legendary writer's room worked so very hard to build. Regardless of what the prosecution may have said over the past half hour, the film is not bad. It's not even mediocre. It's an essential chapter, and if the internet chatter is to be believed, it's not the only one we can look forward to in the future. Should this narrative continue, Chase and Company could do much worse than what they achieved with the Many Saints of Newark, and I can only hope that we never forget the birth of the future monster that is Tony Soprano. Thank you. Case dismissed.
No. Order, please. The case not dismissed. So, Jerry, sit back down.
So confused.
All right. Thank you. Now, members of the jury, Mr. Rob Maynard, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. If you're interested, we're selling Ryan Luis Rodriguez case dismissed shirts in the gift shop.
Ooh, I'll take 4.
Does it come in a 3X?
All right, guys. Interesting trial. This is kind of like the Entourage one we did, where this is basically a follow-up to a series that I didn't see. Ben, are you familiar with The Sopranos?
I know it existed, and I
Sure.
didn't have HBO. That's about it.
Well, that's good. Schlenzo?
I have seen it. That's why I was the judge, but I hadn't seen it as recently as Ryan. That's why it was his case.
Okay. And as a viewer, maybe even fan of The Sopranos, what'd you think of this movie?
All right, so I found myself every time whatever side was talking, I was nodding my head and agreeing with them pretty much, because they both brought up a lot of points that are really good, especially if you are kind of familiar with the show. Like, I was not a super fan, but I've definitely watched it, and like I thought, like the guy they got to play Uncle Junior was great. He sounded just like him, looked just like him. Vera Farmiga, if I'm saying her name right, as the mom. I mean, that's a very daunting character to step into the shoes of, and she did much better than a CGI face plastered onto a body double.
Grand
So,
Moff Tarkin. Oh.
yeah, right. So,
But how did Michael Gandolfini do?
Well, that's the thing. It was such a subdued performance, and like Tony Soprano is a pretty subdued guy in the show a lot of the times. Like he's really like just kind of sits there and thinks for a lot of the show, and I mean, he could be brutal, he could be cruel, he could be smart and conniving, and all those things. And you had the benefit of like a 9-season show to really let that character flourish, and trying to cram a lot of that stuff into the 2-hour movie. But I think Mr. Rodriguez brought up a good point where he's like, at least they didn't do like the Indiana Jones thing where it's like, oh, well, this is why he hates this. This is why this. This is why this.
This is why he's named Solo.
Star Wars.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Solo from Star Wars, the same thing.
Like who are your people? It's like, the Sopranos.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, watch it.
One thing that I found interesting,
yeah,
though, so as not a fan of the series, I saw this movie very different from the Prosecution.
Well, you've never seen the series. It's not that
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm not a fan of the series, and like I'm not familiar with the series.
Yeah.
I saw it very different from the Prosecution. He wanted to see more Tony, and I didn't give a shit about Tony.
I didn't care about him either. Like the trailer sort of hyped up Tony, and I was like, "Who the hell is this guy in the movie?"
And I thought the whole movie went downhill when it started focusing on Tony, because he hadn't really been established in the first hour. So like the first hour of this is very focused on Dickie, who I liked, and I wanted to know more about him because that's what the movie was showing me. He was the main character. He was the guy I was following. He's the one I got attached to, even though he was a murderous dick. But I wanted to see what happened to Dickie next. And halfway through the movie, he like disappears basically, and we start following Tony. And that was very jarring to me. Basically, I felt like we left our main character.
I
and
through the
movie.
agree. I did not know why it switched.
Yeah, not to. I want Ben to talk here in a second, but when Andre Shane was saying that some stuff was heavy-handed, I mean if you looked up ham-fisted heavy hand in the dictionary, it would be that school counselor scene with the mom, where the counselor's like he's talking about all the weird stuff that Tony's doing, and I'm just like this is pretty painful and awkward, especially if you're kind of familiar with the show, because how the mom treats Tony and Tony's weird relationship with her, and just to kind of have them say it all like a school counselor's room, and then you're just like, wait, what happened to like the racial gang warfare?
Yeah,
that we were just, it's like, why are we? Right. What is this?
The racial gang warfare was so interesting. I wanted to see so much more of that. Maybe that's what this film's point is, because I'd watch a whole season of that. That
would be the hook of the season for sure. That would definitely be the
that I would watch.
You should check out Fargo season 4.
Maybe. Get out of here!
That was my right.
Hey, he's just bringing in the T-shirts we ordered. Hey, mine fits perfectly.
Yeah, and so I did want to say, I wanted to see way more of that race war thing, and it basically died out. Again, the prosecution said he thought that was stuck in, and that was, again, one of the most compelling things for me. And then another thing was said is,
But it does feel tacked on if they're not going to explore it, though, too.
Yes,
so,
it feels...
You want to see it more of it, but if you don't, then that's what makes it.
I agree with you. I wanted to see more, and we didn't see it. So good point, and keep that in your back pocket. And then the other thing, as far as characters to resonate with, Giuseppina, the wife, was the character I recognized the most. She wanted to work. She came to America for opportunity. She didn't, kind of stood up for herself. She was an incredibly compelling character. And I would have liked to see more of her. I didn't mind the way she went out. I think that probably should have been closer to the end, and I wish we had seen just a bit more of her. So those were my feelings. I'll let Ben here talk in a second, but
No, you go ahead, guys. You care about
I'm
it
just
more
going to
than
go
I
on
do.
record so I can shut up, and then you guys can talk. Because of that, because we just give up on the characters I thought were interesting and the plots that I thought were interesting, like a third into the movie, I didn't care about anything that comes after that because I don't watch the series. So I'm going guilty.
Wow, the foreman locking in early. I respect that, though. Big Ben, let's hear your thoughts. Let's hear what you've got to say.
You guys are way more interested in this than I was. I was bored to tears during this movie. I just did not care. I didn't know what I was supposed to care about. Doesn't Dickie get shot in the head at one point, like at the end? And he has like an open casket, and like no one, like the hole's gone. And like I wanted to rewind the film and like,
well, they
did he get
patched
shot
it,
in the head?
obviously. No,
Yeah,
they patched it.
Okay.
Obviously,
It is patched.
It looked
you
like
can
there's
see
some
the makeup.
fleshy stuff. Because I kept staring at it. I was like, cool. They had to cover up the bullet wound.
Oh,
So
I just didn't bother rewinding because I just did not care. I'd be like, no, if I did that, I have to watch this film for 5 seconds more. So
I know.
No,
See, like,
thanks.
you don't really like mob movies. I do like mob
don't.
movies. So, like, yes, this feels like a cheap kind of made for TV Goodfellas, but like, I would watch that if it could stay focused on one character and race wars.
It should have focused on one character. 100% agree. Or at least balance them better. Yeah, this whole like building up Tony, just in the self-contained film that this is, I really didn't like him. I didn't see why we were following him. Like his ending in this film doesn't justify him eating up so much of my time. You know,
It didn't make me want to watch 9 seasons of him.
I feel like it wanted its cake and to eat it too. It's like, okay, it's a standalone movie, but you need to have a little bit of Tony Soprano buy-in for some of this stuff to make sense.
I mean, if you're going, this is a Dickie film. Why just have him in the background?
It did kind of feel like a pilot, but it almost felt like a bunch of ideas for a pilot rolled into one thing. You know, yeah. So okay, so Ben, let me go ahead and finish your thought here.
I don't know. I don't know that it's bad enough for me to say guilty. It's just a middling film that just I don't care for. The performances, I do like Vera Farmiga. I do like John Bernthal. I don't know that they're doing much here, but I was in Ray Liotta. I was interested when they were on the screen, I guess. I mean, I was at least hoping they'd give me something. I don't know. Sway me, Dylan. Which way am I going? I have no idea.
All right, Ben. I mean, listen to your heart. Usually you're the guy who says when you're 50-50,
My heart
you lean
says
towards the
not
defense.
guilty, but it's not good. It's for sure not good.
Well,
It's
like,
not
that's
worth
that's
seeing.
the other thing, though. Like, sometimes you got to listen to your gut, not just your heart, you know, and say, like, you know, I just didn't. Maybe there's a reason you just didn't like it, and maybe because it's guilty, Ben.
Not guilty. Screw you, Dylan.
Well, I tried. I'm voting guilty.
I'd like to hear more because since you're the Soprano fan,
Okay. So honestly, it was. When I was listening to the arguments, I appreciate a lot of the stuff Ryan was saying, but I also appreciate what Andre was saying about kind of like how jumbled and discombobulated it was, and then listening to you from the outside, like you have no Soprano context, and just to say like there was interesting things. And then the stuff that as fans or people who watch the show should find very interesting, we also didn't find interesting. You know, so I feel like it was a big failure of intentionality. I think it doesn't even, and it felt almost too safe too. They should have done a bigger swing. And what we got left with was this weird muddled soup of a movie. And honestly, I have no interest in watching it again. Whereas I could see maybe revisiting The Sopranos at some time. But I would just like to say,
you said to me you thought that the script existed as a non-Soprano script first, and then they tacked on Tony into it, and I could see that. Like they
that's what it felt like.
That's
a good point. That's a good point. It seemed like they had a
movie without Tony in it.
yeah, pretty. That's what it felt like. At the time, and also I would just like to say the golden age of television may have got started by Sopranos, but it was fully realized by The Shield. So let's go out there and tell that very handsome judge. And who is also me. Hold on a second. I gotta say the line, right? All right. Mr. Foreman, who is not me, you're the foreman. Have you reached a verdict?
You bet your sweet patoot we have, Your Honor. In the case of the people versus the Many Saints of Newark, we find the defendant, guilty of being a bad movie. Forget about it.
Oh,
no.
hey!
Oh,
Man! Oh, how's your mother? All right. Hey, order in the court. Order in the court. All right. The verdict. She's rendered. The Many Saints of Newark will be outfitted with cement shoes, a Colombian necktie, and be taken on a little trip, if you catch my meaning. Court is adjourned. That was much more Andrew Dice Clay than Johnny Manicotti.
It was the Dice Man.
So Dice Man. Jesus.
This is Fredo Alfredo, the Italian reporter from the Gabagoo Gazette that proves not all Italian Americans are vicious stereotypes. Mr. Rodriguez, you lost this case. What are your thoughts?
Well, if I gave a good goddamn about this movie, I'd be really heartbroken, but I didn't, so it's okay.
Forget about it. And here comes Mr. Andre Shane. You won, sir. Congratulations. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, for starters, I have to thank everybody for voting in my favor. I feel so vindicated and so emotionally uplifted by this vicious takedown of the labor of love of hundreds of individuals who worked on this thing.
That's what we do.
And we love it. But I mean, again, this for me was just was a disappointment. It's not a movie that I in any way wanted to hate, but I appreciate what the jury was saying, and I also appreciate what Mr. Rodriguez was saying. I think the biggest sin of this movie, and there are many, is that its relentless mediocrity leaves one very cold for it. I just did not see any excitement. There was very little excitement online about this project, and after people saw it, there was excitement beforehand to some extent. But it just seems to have fulfilled nobody's expectation in any way, and it's a little bit sad because it really should have been better with this talent. But it's good to win. I appreciate the verdict.
Thank you, Mr. Shane. And that's a arrivederci from me, Fredo Alfredo, from the Gabagoo Gazette. Back to the studio for a post-trial analysis.
I should have done a droopy voice.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I freaking love it. The whole time, the whole day, Maynard and I talking like, we'll make Ben do his Italian and be Fredo Alfredo, and he comes in and does that, and it's even better.
He managed to beat his worst instincts to lean into the stereotype.
God,
what I think's interesting about this verdict and Andre's case is that someone who likes the series and people who aren't familiar with the series both found reasons to hate this movie.
I mean, okay,
for different reasons.
Hate is strong, but I gotta say, it's just the more you think about it, the more you realize it's just such a mess. It's just such a mess. It's like, what were they doing?
Michael Gandolfini, he doesn't have much acting experience, and I mean, it's obvious they just cast him because he looks like his dad and is related to him. But cast someone who's gonna be good at this big part. Rather than someone who just looks like him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and no Russian guy got lost in the tree. I mean, so
Right.
there you go.
I wanted them to find the Russian. If the Russian guy went back in time to the 60s, that would explain his
it would
his
explain
disappearance that
everything.
episode.
Anyway,
that would have been a
let's
story.
forget about it. Andre,
real quick,
what have you been up to? What's been keeping you busy? We haven't talked to you in a while.
That's right. It's been a little while. What can I say? It's the work is coming back. Things are normalizing a little bit. So there's been a little travel and adventures and shooting. I'm a cinematographer, so I just the more I work, the happier I am. But when I'm not working, I'm watching a lot of streaming television, and that's really what's been keeping me awake.
And there's been some new episodes of Film Driven as well.
Absolutely. Film Driven. I mean, we finished. We've we kind of do what we want on Film Driven. We're our own bosses, just like you guys, and it feels good. And it's got to be. We are probably heading into another season in the next couple of months, and we'll probably do another sort of encapsulation of a decade. of a decade of film. I like that format, and I think it was kind of fun to.
You're going to run out of
take-
decades, though. There's only so many.
They go
See?
fast, and
Yeah,
you
there's
already
only-
did the '80s, which was great, by the way. Everyone should go back and listen to your series on the '80s.
Have you
yeah.
thought about just doing a year, an encapsulation of a year? I mean, there's many movies to talk about within 1 year.
Yeah, you
Not,
could do a lot of years.
Not a bad idea, but years are always with us, and what we kind of like to do on Film Driven is kind of talk about genres and movements and kind of like how films tie in with society to some extent, or just how the industry operates as a whole. Not that we're insiders to the industry, but like the artistic element of the industry. And so the whole decade seems to be a good, like, broad way of doing it. But if we decided to just encapsulate and stuff everything into one basket, it would probably come out exactly like the Many Saints of Newark. It'll just be
trying too much at once.
Too much at once. So we're taking it easy, but we're also thinking about filming some of our drives, because we record these things driving, and I'm thinking something exciting a lot of times happens. We've had some close calls over the years, and almost got arrested a couple of times. It was great. So maybe we get a GoPro going and do one of those video.
I would get two GoPros, one from the perspective of the driver, like where you're going, and then
shooting
one back
outwards
on the drivers. Yeah, exactly. So you can
Just
cut to
to
what.
cut them.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo.
Oh, that could be a lot of fun.
I know. And
It's
I'll
an
only
interesting
take a 40% cut for that idea. So,
It's not bad. Well,
You get an EP credit.
If you can volunteer to edit all that stuff, we could
Hey,
definitely.
for 40% cut of the millions and millions of dollars that we'll be making, I'll do it.
That's right, baby. That's right.
So we always ask for a recommendation from our guests for a film that you think people should check out. So what is a movie that people should check out?
I saw a movie recently that kind of took me by surprise. It's from 2014. It's called 71. So it's kind of ties into the time period of the Saints movie, and this one takes place in Belfast in 1971, in the middle of the Irish Troubles, as they call them, I guess. Ooh. And it's basically a story of a soldier who just gets lost in Belfast, and he has to survive essentially in enemy territory, except the enemy territory in this case is, a contemporary European country that just happens to be divided by vicious ethnic strife. And the movie's fantastic. It was directed by this guy, Jan de Mange, whose work I'm actually not that familiar with, but man, he does a fantastic job. The movie's super engaging. It stars Jack O'Connell, who's actually kind of underrated. I'm amazed that guy hasn't been scooped up by Marvel or somebody like that. He's
great in Midsummer.
That's right. He's
who's he in Midsummer?
He's the boyfriend.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
he disappears into roles. He just completely disappears into roles, and he's good, and he's he's charismatic, and he's got a lot of stuff going for him. He should break out any minute now, but so far he's been breaking out for about a decade. But he's in this, and Sean Harris, who I always love in movies, especially playing bad guys, and he doesn't disappoint in this one. I highly recommend 71. It's very tight. It's exciting, and it does not overstay its welcome. And you actually kind of get a feel for what the film is about. It's about its setting, about its milieu. It's a worthwhile trip to the war-torn Northern Ireland.
Nice. That sounds good. Now, before we jump into our next one, I have to know if you saw the new Bond. I know we're
certainly, yeah.
We're
saw
Bond
it.
buddies.
That's right. We are.
We have a strong bond.
Boo!
We've bonded over the series.
Okay, well, we're all on a show, folks.
No. Let Andre share his feelings. Was this one more like Skyfall or Spectre, or what was it for you?
Yes,
I know you don't like Skyfall, so.
Well, the Skyfall drives me crazy, as you know, and in this one. This one drove me less crazy. I thought it was okay. Again, I just want to get excited by these films again, and it's not happening in the Daniel Craig era. Like, I'm not denying that some of them are good and have cool action sequences, but like the rest of them, this one left me a little bit going like, okay.
I'm afraid that wherever it goes in the future, it's gonna try to like fit into the model of like an MCU and be, more cartoonish, and and humor based. I at least like that the Craig ones are so severe.
We
Yeah,
already
I
did
mean,
that with Roger Moore. We can't go back.
Oh, they will though, and that's exactly what they'll try to channel. They'll try to channel those Roger Moores. He'll have goofy gadgets up the wazoo. It could happen.
Well, that's usually where you keep goofy gadgets.
it could happen,
Well.
and there's a conversation I think to be had on this show about whether No Time to Die is a good or a bad film. I gotta kind of think. I've seen it twice now, and it didn't particularly grow on me on second viewing. So
I wanna
if
see it.
5 hours of your life, sir.
I want to see it
We
a
don't-
second time as well. I mean, 5 hours of your life. I've probably given 40 hours of my life to Godzilla versus Megalon, so I think I can spare 5 for No Time to Die. But yeah, I want to see it again because I think the first time you always kind of go in a little prejudiced and kind of already having your made up, and I'm more open-minded the second time because I know what's going to happen. So yeah, no, but good to get your feeling, and yeah, it may be something that we do in the future, but Spectre also is
We're doing all of
going
them,
to day in
apparently.
court too.
Very
Hopefully.
possibly. Have
You
guys
got to
done
give the
Spectre?
people what they want, Big Ben.
Exactly.
Have you guys done Spectre on the show yet?
We haven't done Spectre
right?
yet.
Yeah.
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
I mean, there's definitely a couple of Bond films out there that is always fun to tackle. You know,
Yeah.
your buddy Jeremy Black is also a master of that breakdown, and it's always fun to hear. But yeah, I'd love to do one more. There's several that I have very strong feelings for. But you know, maybe I should defend something in the
Yeah,
future.
we want to do all of them eventually, I think. But
We do?
but it,
You sure
it'll
about
take
that?
time.
We're going to be doing this podcast for well on 30 years. So
Well, you know, we have so many guests that are passionate about Bond. Maybe we could do like a Bond like symposium where we get everyone around.
yeah, we'll knock
Exactly.
some 5 out at once.
Yeah, exactly. Rapid
Yeah.
fire.
It's
Ryan,
interesting
you
to
were
hear-
our charming defense. What have you got for a recommendation this week?
My recommendation is another recent release, one that I actually liked, and that is Julia Ducournau's Titan, I believe it's pronounced. It is a supremely uncomfortable and uncompromising work that defies explanation, and it will not leave your brain for weeks on end. I never need to watch it again, but I'll definitely keep talking about it. It's a rare entry in the body horror canon that can be described as tender, and it's currently still in theaters, but it's a neon release, so I assume it'll be streaming on Hulu in the near future.
Titan.
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 I thought it was
Yeah.
Titan.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
at first, but then I listened to a podcast and they pronounced it Titan, so I assumed
Titan.
they're probably right. I mean,
I've
it's
actually
French.
looked up the French pronunciation
It
of it,
sounds
so I can get it right, and it
pretentious,
is
so
like
probably
Titan.
right.
Well, they're
Yeah, I
just
mean-
French, Ben. That's just the way they say it.
Titan.
It's not pretentious to have another language, Ben.
Oh my god.
But yeah, no, that's one I've had on my list. I know you've said nice things about it, and I've wanted to see it for a while. So I'll have
Good stuff.
it's
stuff.
subtitled, right? So I've just got
Yes,
to
it
be in the mood to read. So I'm not
Well,
always,
there's not a
but I
lot
was-
of dialogue, so
Oh, okay,
you don't have
because
to
I'm not
worry.
always in the
No.
mood to really pay attention to a movie. Like, sometimes I just wanted to be on in the background doing stuff. Dylan, you were our judge. What's your recommendation?
At the risk of stepping on Ben's recommendation, I'm going to recommend a feature that has James Gandolfini in it, and also Brad Pitt, called Killing Them Softly. It came out in 2012. It's a neo-noir kind of mobster movie. I think Ray Liotta's in it too, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And yeah, he's in all of these movies. And it's a very subdued kind of movie. It's the kind of movie you watch like when it's like slightly drizzling and overcast outside, and it's it is. You need the umami.
The
of it.
umami.
Yes, exactly. So like the cast is just great. Everyone works in it, and basically Brad Pitt is this hitman who's trying to reclaim money that was stolen from a mob game, and chaos ensues. But it's just pretty good, and it's got the late great James Gandolfini in it. So Killing Them Softly, 2012, check it out.
See, I
And
thought
let
you
me
were going to
know if it's any
recommend The
good.
Mexican, which also has James Gandolfini and Brad Pitt in it, but that's a very different thing.
It is.
I guess I could have. Honestly, next time we talk about The Sopranos.
Dylan, I almost recommended Killing Them Softly as well. That's
Hey, great minds and all that. Oh, wait, forget
Oh,
about
this
it.
guy.
I've been a big fan of this one, and it's also it's also like a prime example of very tight, well written, boom, bada bing, and you're out. You're out in 90, and it has something to say about stuff. It looks cool. It's got a bunch of great performances. Gandolfini is fantastic in it. Man,
No, you're right. It's tight and it's slick. It's everything you kind of want in that genre.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Cynical, pretty cynical, darkly cynical.
Oh no, it's dark. It is dark. Yeah,
Yeah.
But that's kind of where that neo noir aspect of it fits in.
Yeah,
and I just keep saying neo noir because that's what Wikipedia said. So take it up with them, Bobby.
Yeah, that's true. I'll go next because I'm doing another Ray Liotta feature, and that's
fantastic.
2003's Identity. It's a sort of loose adaptation of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. It's about 10 strangers who get stuck in a motel in the middle of nowhere and begin to get killed off one by one, and soon they discover they may have a lot more in common than they first thought. The cast is terrific. Apart from Ray Liotta, it has John Cusack,
Love him,
Amanda Peet back when she was popular, Alfred Molina, John C. McGinley, Rebecca De Mornay, who I can only assume Ryan loves, and of course Clea Duvall.
I love her too.
I love Clea Duvall. So, and it has a really great twist. So I hope nobody spoils it for you, like someone first did for me in a rental store back in 2003.
Oh, by the twist, do you mean it's because they all? Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Ryan. But actually, it was someone spoiled it for me there in the DVD store. But it sounded so cool. I was like, "Hey, what movie were they talking about?" And I rented it. So I did know what was going to happen, and I still loved it. But I'm still not going to spoil it for you. It is currently streaming on Netflix, which surprises me because they usually don't have shit anymore. So,
wow, that is surprising.
Yeah, but it's on Netflix. So, Identity from 2003. And Big Ben, why don't you send us on?
Bring us home.
I didn't know I could recommend Identity. I want to do that now too. Can I do it?
Yes.
Go for it.
No, as was pointed out, I'm not a big fan of mob movies. So instead, I'm going to go with one of my favorite Vera Farmiga films, and go with The Conjuring 2. I love the rapport that her character Lorraine Warren has with Patrick Wilson's Ed Warren. The two in the films just feel like they belong together, conquering the supernatural. The Conjuring 2 spans 2 quote-unquote real-life hauntings that have really been all but debunked in actuality, but amplifies that terror to 11, all while giving us heartwarming films or heartwarming moments between all the families involved. It makes a great double feature. Just don't venture too far off of that beaten path in this universe, because that way lies La Llorona, and you do not want any of that.
I watched the whole franchise this year. And yeah, there's I mean, some of the Annabelles are okay. But yeah, the Nun and La Llorona were pretty rough.
La Llorona.
Hey, can we give Ryan 2 minutes to explain why he didn't like Saints of Newark? I knew he had to defend it, but he made it clear he didn't like it.
Yeah, Ryan, what'd you think? Especially as a fan of the show.
Andre brought up. There you go.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree with everything Andre said too. So I'm with you.
See, that's what's interesting is what Andre had to say was very compelling to people who know the show. But for me and Ben, we didn't know the show, so I didn't want to see more Tony. Like, I didn't care about Tony at all.
Well, they had to pick a lane. They had to pick a lane.
I wanted to see more. Was it Michelle De Rossi? Yeah, Michelle De Rossi. I wanted to see more of her. She was great.
Was that Josepina?
Yes.
Yeah. She's very charismatic.
I wanted to see her get her beauty parlor, and she's just one of those people that as soon as she's on the screen, like your eye, she immediately has your eye. She was great. I think I even said to Dylan, I was like, "Is the Sopranos full of women like this?" He said, "No," and I said, "No, I'm not watching." Seriously.
No, not that good looking. I apologize.
Sopranos has some beautiful, lovely women. Believe me, give it a try. They pop up once in a while. Some of them are even Italian.
If they could get some robots in there.
Oh, jeez.
Think about it. Anyway, Ryan, did you have anything more you wanted to say?
No, we're good.
All right. Hey, we love you, Ryan. And with that, we're all out of show for this week, but we want to thank our guest, Andre Shane, for joining us. Thank you so much, Andre.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
We're going to have you back very soon. We'll talk some James Bond, I'm sure.
Right.
And we hope everyone else will join us again as well, as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Bada boom,
Forget
bada
about
boom.
it.
Oh!
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.